kibitzing. What we were kibitzing around earlier is that CWTA is participating in the Stride for Peace run and walk on Thursday. And as we go through the afternoon here or evening, Kat's going to post a link. So if you have not yet contributed for Stride for Peace, you can do so using the link that Kat would post. And the reason we're doing this is that one of our agenda items is trying to deal with this whole business that we're suffering through, and that's gun violence, and too many young people being killed, before their time. Some just accidentally, like these poor children, just this past week or so, that have been killed sitting in their parents' car, or on the porch and things like that. But so what we're trying to do is to raise money so that we can keep working in the area of violence prevention and elimination of guns from our society. So if you agree with that, if you believe in that, please donate and help us continue to do that. And so now I'm turning the mic over to Ms. Mary Driscoll, who's going to introduce our guest for this evening.
Okay, I will do that. I'm very pleased to be able to introduce Fred Tsao. Even though I never met Fred in person, I'm meeting him now on Zoom. I've heard so much about him that I feel like I kind of know him. So just to start, Fred is the longtime senior policy counsel at ICIRR, which is the Illinois Council on Immigrant and Refugee Rights. He plays a major role in all immigration and refugee policy discussions locally and statewide and even nationally. And Fred not only helps craft immigration and refugee policy, but he also drives its implementation, which is really quite important. Fred is a self-described recovering attorney. Maybe we'll have to ask him what that means. He got his degree at the University of Michigan. He worked at Prairie State Legal Service.
Uh-oh, Mary froze.
Uh-oh.
Freeze, Mary.
Oh, am I unfrozen now?
Yeah,
Okay.
you're unfrozen. Okay.
Okay.
You're good.
So he
You're good,
worked
Mary.
at the Chicago Hunger Federation and the Missouri Public Interest Group. Fred is a native of Chicago, and he is the son of immigrants from Asia. So without further ado, Fred is going to start, but I just want to say that if we have questions, hold them or put them in the chat, and Fred will answer them after his presentation. Okay? All right, Fred, it's all yours.
Okay, thank you, Mary. I realized I was supposed to give this presentation 2 months ago, but unfortunately I got sick, non-COVID, but similar to, and strangely enough, almost exactly 1 year after I caught COVID. So I'm feeling much better now. Knock wood. All right, so I am going to share my screen and go into present what should be a fairly brisk set of slides. So when I was asked back in February or March to give this presentation, one of the things that I was asked specifically to do is just walk through the different kinds of categories of people, or that we're talking about now with respect to the situation with the new people arriving from the southern border. And I should state here, that's my organization, ICIRR, is very heavily involved with coordinating case management and services for the people in the shelters. I will say a few more words about that, as well as advocacy for policies to better assist the people in the shelter and the people who are arriving. I'd like to think we're having some impact in that regard, but it's frustrating. And after going through my presentation, you'll understand why. Okay, so I'm going to talk about these 5 types of people, refugees, asylees, asylum seekers, that is people who are trying to become asylees, and then people who are applying for or receiving TPS or temporary protected status, and then people who have parole or parolees. So I'll say a few words about each of these different categories. So refugees and asylees are really the same category under international law. These are people who have a well-founded fear of persecution in their native countries that can be attributed to one of 5 different factors: race, religion, nationality, political opinion, or membership in specific social groups. And that last item is kind of a catch-all that will encompass groups that may not fall very cleanly into the other 4. So, for instance, survivors of domestic violence who are being ignored by government authorities or police authorities in their native country. That's a specific social group. So so refugees and asylees fall into this particular definition. Where they differ comes in how these people are processed. So refugees are identified outside of the United States, usually under United Nations auspices, and then they are resettled into the United States through the State Department and international relief organizations like Catholic Charities or World Relief or HIAS or Church World Services. Asylees, on the other hand, are people who have arrived in the United States one way or another. They could have come on a student visa or a visitor's visa. They could have crossed the border. They could have encountered Border Patrol at the border and received a parole to come in. Or more recently, they could have gone through a more formal process involving the CBP-1 app. They scheduled an appointment, they got screened by Customs and Border Protection, and now they're being allowed into the country. So applying for asylum is a fairly rigorous and difficult process. Historically, only about 25 to 30% of all people who apply for asylum actually get approved. Now, this does factor in people who, may be filing for asylum just for the heck of filing for asylum, but it also includes many people who have bona fide claims of persecution, who, for one reason or another, aren't able to document it, or just are not believed by asylum officers or immigration judges. It's not something that's done lightly. Okay, refugees, is kind of a baseline. People who are admitted into the United States as refugees, they can work right away. They're eligible for federal refugee assistance for their first 90 days. And then under federal law, they can receive cash, they can receive medical assistance, they can receive nutritional assistance or SNAP benefits for their first 7 years in the United States. And they can apply to get a green card, that is lawful permanent resident status, 1 year after they are admitted to the United States. And their green cards get backdated to the date when they arrived in the United States. That's important for citizenship purposes. So rather than waiting the full 5 years after getting a green card, they can apply 5 years after they're admitted to the United States. So that's kind of the gold star category for people seeking humanitarian relief in the United States. Asylum seekers, on the other hand, have to wait 180 days after they file for asylum to qualify for a work permit, unlike refugees who can work right away. Now, they can apply for their work permits 30 days early. So after 150 days, of filing their asylum application. While their applications are pending, they cannot receive any kind of federal public benefits. They are only eligible for all those benefits that refugees get after they get approved, and then they are considered similar to refugees. So they're eligible for cash and Medicaid and SNAP benefits for their first 7 years in status. Now, Illinois is somewhat unique in that we are a state that has created a program. It's called VTTC, or Victims of Trafficking, Torture, and Certain Other Crimes, whereby people who have applied for asylum can enroll in this program and get cash, a small amount of cash. They can qualify for SNAP, they can qualify for Medicaid after they have applied for, after they've submitted their applications. Now, you'll notice that there's some words in here that I've crossed out. That's because VTTC originally made people who are preparing to apply for asylum also eligible. But unfortunately, with new state legislation that was part of the budget deal, those people who currently qualify because they're preparing to apply will no longer be eligible once the new law takes effect. So why is this important? The state had been extending VTTC benefits to the people in the shelters and other people who are arriving from the border on the theory that all of them would eventually be applying for asylum. So that unfortunately blew up the enrollment and blew up the cost of the program. And as a result of that, in the budget deal that just passed last week, VTTC is getting cut. So you need to actually have an asylum application on file in order to qualify for the program. Now, people who get asylum, people who are approved, also will qualify for their green cards after 1 year. Their green cards will be backdated to 1 year instead of the date on which they arrived in the United States. So these folks also get a bit of a break when it comes to the 5 years to qualify for citizenship, but not the full benefit that goes to refugees. Okay, so that's okay. I should note here too that there is federal legislation pending in Congress that would allow people to apply for their for their work permits 30 days after they file their asylum applications instead of 150 days. And you see here the list of the Illinois, delegation members who've co-sponsored this legislation. There are only 4, unfortunately, and unfortunately, neither of our senators has co-sponsored the Senate legislation. So there is also something called temporary protected status, which covers quite a number of the people who've arrived from the southern border, but not everybody. So temporary protected status, or TPS, is available to people from countries that are experiencing war, civil strife, or natural disasters. They have to have been in the United States before a certain date that's designated by the Department of Homeland Security. So TPS currently covers 16 countries, and you see here, first off, the 3 of the more recent designations, Venezuelans who have arrived on or before July 31st of last year can apply for TPS. Ukrainians, Afghans who are fleeing the wars, or people fleeing the war in Ukraine or the Taliban takeover in Afghanistan also qualify for TPS. TPS also covers a couple of countries that are now sending people to the United States and have historically sent people to the United States. But the cutoff date for those countries dates back in the case of Honduras, 25 years. So people who arrived from Honduras back before December 30th, 1998, can qualify for temporary protected status. Many of them do qualify for TPS, but nobody who came from Honduras more recently. Same with El Salvador. Now there are people who people who arrived from El Salvador 23 years ago who still qualify for TPS. And in fact, El Salvador makes up the largest country, the country with the largest population covered by TPS. It's about 300,000. So, should we update those dates? I think so, but they don't listen to me. So what TPS does is it basically protects people from deportation, and just as important, it makes them eligible for work permits. So all those Venezuelans who arrived before July of last year, or before August of last year, they can get work permits. Unfortunately, those Venezuelans who came on or after August 1st do not qualify for work permits, at least not under TPS. And TPS, unfortunately, does not lead to getting a green card. Unlike asylum, unlike refugee status, TPS is basically a dead end. Now, people can continue to get TPS so long as TPS is not revoked. The previous administration tried to revoke TPS for several countries, but that move was blocked in court. So that explains why people from Honduras and El Salvador, all 20 plus years later, still have TPS. Okay, so last thing I'm going to cover here, or actually next to the last thing I'm going to cover here, is humanitarian parole. This is granted on a case-by-case basis by the federal government, mostly for people who are outside the United States, in situations where traditional refugee resettlement is not practical because there are so many people. Parole, probably the best historical examples of parole were Vietnam after the fall of Saigon, and then Afghanistan after the fall of Kabul, and now people fleeing Ukraine after the Russian invasion. So in each of these cases, there were specific parole programs that were created. Operation Allies Welcome for the Afghans, and for Ukraine, Uniting for Ukraine. Now, parole is also being granted to some people who are arriving at the southern border, particularly those who are using the CBP-1 process. Now, much more recently, President Biden created this new program called CHNV, which is for Cubans, Haitians, Nicaraguans, and Venezuelans, who otherwise would be showing up at the southern border, but instead those folks are able to go through a process to apply, in their home countries or along the way, and do this in an orderly fashion and get pre-screened and then paroled into the United States. There are only so many slots available per month. Unfortunately, the state of Texas has seen fit to try to bring a court challenge against this program. Fortunately, that legal challenge has failed, but it could happen again. And this is the first time I'm mentioning the state of Texas. Texas will figure a bit more prominently in the next few slides here. Okay. So humanitarian parole is usually granted for 18 to 24 months. Very often it does get renewed. Afghans just got renewed. Ukrainians are going to be facing renewal probably sometime later this year. The good thing about parole is that it also extends a permission to work during the duration of the parole. So people who are paroled in for 24 months can get a work permit for up to 2 years. Also, one kind of interesting aspect of parole is that some of the people who qualify for parole may also qualify for a green card based on a family relationship or a employment relationship or what have you. getting paroled enables people to process their green card applications in the United States without having to leave. Why this is important is that for quite a number of people who are paroled into the United States or who receive parole after coming to the United States, they would have to leave the country and process their applications for permanent resident status back in their home countries or otherwise abroad. And if in some cases, if they do that, they can be barred from coming back to the United States for a good amount of time, for up to 10 years. So parole is important in that respect as well. And you may have heard about some movements to grant parole more broadly to people who are undocumented here in the United States. That parole initiative is mainly focused on getting these people work permits. But for certain people, including spouses and parents of U.S. citizens, parole could also qualify them for green cards. So, yeah, watch out for that possibility. Okay, the last thing I'm going to cover here, so far as different kinds of statuses, is release on recognizance. So, the Customs and Border Protection, the border agency, does not have the resources to process and screen everybody who they come across. So what's been happening quite often is that CBP will arrange with the immigration courts to set up a court date sometime somewhere and allow people to come into the United States and basically be released on recognizance while they're waiting for their court dates. They are going to be required to check into the local ICE office, Immigration and Customs Enforcement Office, and very often they will be subject to electronic monitoring. They'll be fitted with an ankle bracelet, or they'll otherwise be set up with some kind of check-in system while they're here in the United States waiting for their court dates. Release on recognizance doesn't give anything. So no work permits, no folks, nothing. At least with respect to federal benefits, folks may eventually apply for asylum, in which case they would be eligible for BTTC state benefits. Beyond that, though, nothing. Okay, so what's been so different about this new arrival situation that we're going through now? Well, for the last 10 years or so, we've been seeing larger numbers of people showing up at the border. We've gone through a number of different situations with unaccompanied minors, teenagers showing up, and then families, and then the current situation we're in now. What's been happening over the last 10 years or so is that historically, when people show up at the border, they're trying to get away from Border Patrol. They're trying to make their way into the United States, eluding detection by federal authorities. What started happening about 10 years ago is that instead of trying to get away from authorities, people are actively seeking out Border Patrol agents to turn themselves in and go through the process of applying for humanitarian relief, in most cases asylum. Now, very often you'll hear these people being described as illegals, illegal border crossers. I do want to remind everyone here that applying for asylum, applying for humanitarian protection is a legal process. People are seeking legal relief through a legal process. So they are not illegally here. Now, I should also point out that under the previous guys, the guys who used to occupy the White House and the Department of Homeland Security, there were a number of attempts to try to discourage people from showing up at the border or for trying to make claims for humanitarian relief. And several of these have, most of these policies are no longer effect. Some of them were actively challenged in court and blocked. You see here the transit ban, which prevents people from applying for asylum or qualifying if they passed through another country and did not apply for asylum in that country first and get denied. That was blocked in court. Also, we had the Remain in Mexico program. So people could apply for asylum, but then they had to wait outside the United States while their cases were pending, which could take years. That turned into a humanitarian disaster as people were waiting for their cases to be called in really squalid camps along the Mexican side of the border. And then most recently, you had Title 42, which was, speaking of COVID, ostensibly COVID-related initiative to block people from coming into the country based on public health grounds. So Title 42 did drop the numbers of people who were allowed into the United States. There were certain categories of people who were waived in despite Title 42, and then Title 42 was finally rescinded by the Biden administration May of last year. 3 years into the pandemic. So another key difference is the country where that people are coming from, Venezuela. So the people had not been arriving from Venezuela, in huge numbers, up until fairly recently. Why Venezuela? Well, Venezuela unfortunately has been subject to international sanctions for much of the last 15 years or so. Since under Maduro and before him under Hugo Chavez. So the relatively scant Venezuelan population has meant that there really is very little Venezuelan community infrastructure here in Chicago or really any place else. And so, people who are arriving from Venezuela really don't have very many resources or, to seek out, or very few mutual aids organizations to turn to. Now, so of the new arrivals coming to Chicago, about 90% are Venezuelan. Now, that's not to say that there are not people from other countries, and you'll see on the slide the list of some of the more common countries that are from which people are coming to Chicago from the southern border. I have heard of instances where people from China or people from Afghanistan are also showing up at the southern border, though those folks are not going to Chicago so much. They're going elsewhere, going to other communities, in the interior of the United States. Okay, so those are some of the main differences. Also, what's also a key difference is that the governor of Texas has decided to make a huge spectacle of all of this. Governor Abbott has seen fit to offer transportation to selected cities that he is referring to as sanctuary cities. These are communities that have on our books welcoming policies that really have nothing to do with asylum seekers or other people arriving from the border. These are more policies that have to do with whether cities cooperate with immigration enforcement, as is the case here in Chicago. Texas nevertheless has singled out 6 or 7 cities to send people to, and has also seen fit not to coordinate with any of those cities, but instead just sending buses randomly to arrive, in the middle of the night or at odd days or odd hours. Chicago started receiving buses from Texas, just about almost 2 years ago now, right, Labor Day weekend 2022. I should note here that Venezuelans and other people have been arriving from the southern border, going through, being released on recognizance by CBP even before that. And I'll say a few more words about that on the next slide. So all in all, Chicago has received more than 42,000 people arriving on the buses, and that's not really counting people who arrive on their own on planes or on their own buses. These are just the buses that have arrived from Texas. Only New York City has received more. Denver has received more people per capita, but it's a smaller city. So Chicago has received a good number of people. So unfortunately, we've also seen a lack of federal coordination and a lack of federal resources. So, I point out here what's happened with Afghans and what's happened with Ukrainians. Chicago and Illinois have received almost as many Ukrainians as we have people from the southern border. We haven't heard much about the resettled Ukrainians aside from maybe success stories of Ukrainians who've been resettled. Why has that been the case? First off, the federal government is actively coordinating resettlement of the Ukrainians. They've set up a program, Uniting for Ukraine. They have identified sponsors. The Ukrainians are receiving work permits. They're receiving other kinds of federal support. That is definitely not the and that similar policies have been applied to the Afghans. That is not the case with the people arriving from the southern border. Also, what we have been seeing is Customs and Border Protection or Border Patrol sending people off to random destinations and setting them up with random care of addresses to receive correspondence. We here at ICIRR have received at least two such situations with people who were given our address, our name and our address, just really kind of randomly to people who were set up with court dates here in Chicago. Fortunately, that hasn't happened so much of late, but it was happening. And then last and certainly not least, the federal government had every opportunity to set up coordinated transportation for people to get to where they need to go, to get to where they had court dates or they had family or compadres here in the United States. They did not do that. There's actually a New Yorker article that came out a couple months ago that revealed that Homeland Security actually had developed a proposal to do just this. The White House shot the idea down, mainly for political reasons. That unfortunately left a void that gave the government of Texas and the governor of Texas the opportunity to send buses hither and yon, including to Chicago. Okay. What we also saw from the federal government is lack of resources. If people are applying for asylum, well, shouldn't we have more asylum officers ready to consider their cases? Unfortunately, that hasn't happened. Also, if asylum cases are before immigration judges, shouldn't we also, and immigration cases are very badly backlogged in the immigration courts, shouldn't we get more asylum judges, more immigration judges? Unfortunately, that has not happened either. In fact, there aren't even really enough adjudicators to consider work permit applications for all those people who are getting paroled or who are getting temporary protected status. There's just not enough to go around. Now, to their credit, the federal government has been doing some coordination for people in the shelters to set up their applications for TPS or for work permits. So that is one good thing that has happened. But unfortunately, otherwise the resources are just not there. Now, the federal government has, in addition to in addition to not providing enough personnel, there's not enough federal dollars to go around either. So the federal government did create this new program called Shelter and Services back in December 2022, mind you, back when Democrats still controlled the House of Representatives. That program was funded at $800 million. SSP was renewed for the current fiscal year, 2024, at $650 million. So the program got cut. And it's a competitive bidding process to apply for SSP grants. That has meant that Illinois and Chicago have to compete with all these communities on the border and all these other cities, including New York, for limited SSP funds. Out of all that funding that's been made available, Illinois and Chicago have received only $51 million from this program, including $19 million that were just approved about 6 weeks ago, back in mid-April. So it's a drop in the bucket compared to what we really need. So what has all this meant? You're welcome, question mark. Again, compared to the situation with Ukrainians arriving, instead of people coming in individually and getting sponsored and getting the support that they need, instead you had the spectacle of buses arriving, so larger groups of people arriving visibly and all at once. So that's, so when the buses started arriving and in late August of 2022, that quickly overwhelmed the city's existing emergency shelter capacity, which already was very, very limited. Under shelter policies in place at the time, people had 48 hours in the shelter and then they had to leave. So fortunately, at that point, the state stepped in and set up a bunch of hotels that provided extended shelter for the people who were being timed out of the city shelters. We got involved with case management and coordination for folks at those hotels. Fortunately, the state was able to provide rental assistance for the folks at the hotels, and the hotels did phase out spring of last year, about almost just over a year ago. Unfortunately, as that was happening, people were also starting to show up. They were getting flown in. Buses started picking back up again, and that again quickly overwhelmed the shelter system. The way that our shelter system is set up, people have to call 311 to wait for a spot in the shelter. While they're awaiting their shelter spots, they're instructed to hang out at a police station or a hospital emergency room. Hospitals didn't particularly take kindly to that because they're trying to.
What happened to Fred?
I'm not sure. It looks like he dropped off. I don't know if it was an internet issue on his end, but let's see.
Okay. All right. So yeah, the way 311 worked is people had to hang out at police stations, which meant that encampments started forming inside or outside of police stations, and you saw that spectacle of tent cities at the police stations basically through much of last year. The cities, then stepped up to try to set up shelters, expanding its shelter capacity. At that point, we also had people kicking up, raising huge amounts of resistance to the new shelter locations, particularly in historically disinvested and underserved communities. We're wondering, okay, well, the city can provide all these resources for these these new people, why haven't they been providing resources for us all this time? I think that's a fair criticism. But fortunately, the city was able to ramp up and and uh, uh, you know, um, provide adequate shelter and eventually relocate all the people who were at the police stations to into shelters. Okay, my computer just restarted here, and I should be able to rejoin. Bear with me, please. Okay. Shelter populations kind of peaked out this past January. And it was around that time that the city started also imposing time limits on shelter stays. Also around that time, the state started imposing limits on availability of rental assistance to the point where newly arriving people are not eligible for rental assistance. Okay, I am trying to. Okay, bear with me here. I'm going to get back on. Register again.
Recording in progress.
Okay. Okay. Okay, I'm back. All right, and I need to be made a co-host again. Sorry about this.
Fred, we understand technology is in charge.
Yeah.
Okay,
Oy.
you're now.
Okay, there we go. All right. Let's fast forward here. Okay. 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 So, okay, I can move on to the next slide here. Okay. Again, fortunately, even with this situation, there were many organizations and many individuals who stepped up. I mentioned our role in coordinating case management at the hotels and again at the shelters. Even before that, there were any number of organizations that were helping with the initial reception of people at, when the buses started first arriving at the Migrant Arrival Reception Center at North Park Nature Preserve. You also, when the encampment started developing at the police stations, quite a number of mutual aid groups also were providing food and support for the people, at the encampments. And again, fortunately, we have some pretty robust immigration legal resources available here in Chicago, and so quite a number of those organizations, as well as members of the private bar, were able to coordinate workshops to, again, screen people for asylum, screen people for work permit eligibility or for temporary protected status, and help out with those applications. Okay, so unfortunately, we also had attempts by certain government officials to try to create really hostile policies. I mentioned earlier our Chicago Welcoming Ordinance, which again limits coordination with ICE, with immigration enforcement. There were a number of city council members who tried to take advantage of the the current situation with the new arrivals to try to attack the welcoming ordinance. Fortunately, yeah, I will not name names, but I can share those with you if you want. But let's just say that that's how I spent much of this past fall, trying to beat back those attempts to try to undo or otherwise undermine the welcoming city ordinance. Also, over the past several months, we've seen any number of different localities and counties, for that matter, try to declare themselves non-sanctuary communities. That is, communities where if new arrivals show up, they are not going to be provided with any county or local resources. Instead, they'll be sent on their way. Fortunately, of late, I know of at least 2 counties that have rejected these attempts to pass non-sanctuary ordinances. In this case, I will name the communities: Winnebago County, where Rockford is, and DeKalb County, were those two counties. The other thing that's been happening more recently is that people have been trying to set, or communities have been trying to set limits on when buses can arrive. So last December, Chicago passed an ordinance saying, okay, buses, if you're going to show up in Chicago, you can show up and unload passengers only at these locations and only at these times. And if you violate this ordinance, we're going to impound your bus. So Texas found a way to get around that. So instead of buses going all the way into downtown Chicago, instead Texas was sending buses to various communities in the Chicago suburbs. And then the buses would drop off people at the downtown of the village, or more often than not at the metro station, and then people had to find their way to downtown Chicago via metro. So in the wake of that, particularly right after the new year, there were any number of different communities who themselves passed bus restriction ordinances. The Illinois General Assembly had been considering state legislation to restrict bus arrivals. That legislation, unfortunately, for better or worse, did not move forward by the time spring session ended last week. So I just have a few more slides here. Okay, what now? Okay, so as I mentioned, Chicago shelter population peaked out at about 15,000. 15,000 right around the holidays. That population has steadily declined. At this point, it is about 7,500. And the number of shelters also peaked out back in January at about 32. At this point, there are about 15 to 16 shelters now still operating in the city of Chicago. Also, even with the diversion of buses to the suburbs, the pace of buses from Texas has slowed down considerably. Of course, Governor Abbott will take full credit for that, but there are at least 2 other reasons why this is happening. First off, Mexico has started turning people around and sending people who arrive in the north of Mexico or at the border, sending them back south as a deterrent measure. That policy is likely to continue under new President Sheinbaum. Also, the smuggling networks that have been sending people through Texas are instead sending people through Arizona or in other places. So as a result of all that, fewer people are showing up in Texas, so there are fewer people to bus up to Chicago. All that said, there's an event happening in Chicago later this summer, the Democratic National Convention, and we are almost positive that Governor Abbott would love nothing more than to embarrass President Biden and the Democratic Party during their big show in Chicago in August. So we are bracing for the likelihood that buses will start coming from Texas again, right around the time that the Democrats are going to be convening here. So Fortunately, state and local government have stepped up to provide additional resources in anticipation of this happening. So Governor Pritzker and Cook County President Preckwinkle have each pledged and won approval for additional funding. The General Assembly just approved $182 million in state funds for people who are arriving, through next fiscal year. Mayor Johnson also recently won an additional $70 million in additional funding to supplement what was approved last fall in the city budget. Mayor Johnson, unfortunately, has faced major blowback from the city council. And there is some question as to whether he can go back to the well yet again. That said, voters in Chicago also unfortunately rejected Bring Chicago Home, which of course would have provided millions of dollars in additional resources to address homelessness, not just among the new arrivals, but also among longtime Chicagoans here. There have also been some communities that have been providing shelter and care, most prominently Oak Park, but even Oak Park has phased out its operations, and most communities, unfortunately, have been sending people to Chicago and not wanting to do their fair share. So while this has been happening, the federal government has also not been providing additional resources. The federal government had the opportunity to provide more in the way of asylum officers and funding for receiving communities. That took the form of the supplemental spending bill that President Biden proposed last fall. Senate Republicans said, okay, well, Biden, if you want that, we want measures to fix the border. And so a small bipartisan group of senators, tried to work something out. And came up with a proposal that unfortunately would have included further limits on asylum, as well as basically a restoration of Title 42, mass expulsion authority. So that legislation died in the Senate back in February, thanks in no small part to the presumptive Republican nominee, who is now a convicted felon. Congress did see fit to pass the other provisions of that supplemental, the military aid provisions, back in April. Senate Democrats tried just a couple of weeks ago to resurrect the border bill. That failed. And then, while all this was happening, Congress did see fit to pass the regular appropriations bills. That, as I mentioned, was the bill that cut the funding for the Shelter and Services Program from $800 million to $650 million for this year. So, with all that, President Biden is, instead of trying to provide additional resources, or for that matter, additional orderly ways for people to come to the United States, instead he's trying to crack down. So tomorrow, Biden is scheduled to issue an executive order that will direct the Border Patrol to shut down the border entirely if they encounter more than 2,500 people on any given day, and then not reopen the border until encounters fall below 1,500. Now, mind you, even when Title 42 was in effect, border encounters that very, very seldom fell below 1,500. So this essentially will shut down the border. And we have divided government. So prospects for anything further in the way of resources or personnel, or for that matter, leadership, are going to be really limited. What that has meant is that our state, our city government, our county are still going to be faced with these challenges of what to do with the people arriving from the border. And I'll close here by saying that more communities really need to step up because, as the adage goes, many hands make light work. So we really need more communities and more, many other folks to really step up and provide the care that these folks need. So with that, I am going to stop my share, and it's 7:02. So
Yeah, I was
I can
gonna remind you that we were really out of time. Is there anybody with a burning question? Otherwise, we had committed to Fred that he could leave at 7. We've already passed that. So if there's something burning for Fred, if we have questions, can we send them to you for later responses? If there are questions that you can't deal with now.
I can't say no to Miss Betty. So Betty, go ahead. Go ahead and ask your question.
My
Betty,
question isn't really involved. It's just that I'm still wondering what has happened to the children who were separated.
Oh,
Where are they?
yeah.
Have they
Yeah.
gotten them to their parents yet, or are there still hundreds of them still separated?
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you, Betty. I hate to end on a really down note, but so President Biden did set up a task force to try to reunite as many of the kids with their parents or with other guardians, as best as possible. So fortunately, that task force has made a significant amount of progress. Unfortunately, there are still something like 200 or so children who remain separated. And again, this was so needless. This is a legacy of that we're still living with 5 years after the former guys imposed this family separation policy. So yeah, we can anticipate this happening again if certain things go certain ways.
Thank you.
Mary?
There are no questions in the chat.
I have a question,
Okay.
a quick one. Well, what can we do? What can Chicago women take action? What kinds of things can we do to support you and the issues?
There we go. There we go. Well, I think first and foremost, speak to the members of our Illinois delegation and ask them to step up. Now, again, the federal government is divided. We've certainly done our share of speaking with both of our senators' offices, and I think in one case even to Senator Durbin directly, as well as certain other members of our delegation, to urge them to do what they can to win additional resources or at least get better coordination. Actually, I should have shared with you all. We do have a list of demands on our website. It's just icirr.org/new arrivals. So these are the kinds of things that we're expecting at all levels of government, not just the federal government, but also state and local government. And fortunately, state and local government have stepped up. Federal government, not so much, but we really need the feds to step up. While that's happening too, again, President Biden is going to be issuing this executive order tomorrow. We need to raise our voices to oppose this, because this is going to essentially deny many people who have really strong, valid claims for humanitarian protection. If they get sent back to Venezuela, they're going to get killed, and unfortunately, they're going to be stuck at the border because of this election year posturing.
Fred, I have a question. You had mentioned opposition in the General Assembly to changing legislation. Where did that opposition come from? Was it from municipalities? Was it from interest groups? Or anybody easily identified that we can go after?
Okay. Well, General Assembly is now out of session. The next opportunity would be after, during the veto session after the elections.
Mhm.
Jackie, I think I was specifically when I made that comment, I was specifically referencing the VTTC program, which again, that seemed to be an initiative of our Department of Human Services, which in fairness is seeing huge cost overruns on the program, far more than anticipated. So we have won promises from the Department of Human Services that they will keep people on the program if they're already on it. And then to also revisit, to basically see how it goes, and to possibly revisit these legislative changes in the fall or next year if things start leveling off, or if things otherwise change. So that's
we
good.
should stay tuned.
Stay tuned. Yes. Yes.
All right, I don't see any burning questions or hands, so Mary, you wanna end our session with Fred? I think it's been so informative. I've learned a hell of a lot. I don't know about anybody else, but Fred, you've helped me and hopefully the rest of our attendees here, but Mary, I'll let you close out.
Well, okay, I just want to thank you, Fred. I mean, it was great, like Jackie said, it was really informative. And people again are asking, are we going to be able to send a copy of your slides, Fred?
Okay. Actually, I saw that you did record the meeting. It may actually be better to make the recording available, even with the lapse about 45 minutes in when my computer shut down.
Okay, fair enough.
And again, my apologies for that. That was
it
beyond
happened.
my control.
It's happened to me for sure.
Yeah.
All right, well, we should let you scoot because it's already 7:10. So
okay.
Thank you again. Thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you, Mary. Thank you. Thank you, Jackie. Thank you, everyone. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. So I just want to remind everybody again of our fundraiser Strike for Peace to try and help us rid the community of gun violence and guns and police misconduct and all the rest of that stuff. So yeah, so Kat, post one more time our donation page so that people can donate. And if you still want to walk or run, it's still time to do that. I think you can still sign up to join TWTA and Walking and Running for Peace.
Are we each picking up our own individual packets? I received that email today.
I think so. You gotta get your packet if you're gonna walk or run.
Yeah.
Any other questions from anybody?
Judy's out shining everybody.
Oh, where is it?
Did you see her huge amount?
No, I haven't looked recently, but I don't.
I was shocked. This is the first time I've done that. I was shocked. I'm gratified.
I was too. And what I was getting, I couldn't believe people were.
I couldn't either.
I was like, what?
I mean, it's like, oh my God. So
we should do pretty good
for our next round, but I won't go back. My strategy is I'm not going to go back to the same people. So.
Okay.
I sent out an email to everybody I sent them out to before, and it occurred to me that some people thought it was a spam, and a few people reached out to me and asked me if it was, and I said absolutely not. So I sent it out again today and reminded them, I'm a little short of my goal, so please contribute.
Yeah, I have to do that. That's on my to-do list. I intended to do it today, but I'm not always in charge of my schedule. So are there any questions from anybody? Any comments on Fred's presentation?
I thought it was wonderful. There's just so much information, was overwhelming.
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought it was great, and it really provided a context for what's going on and why. I mean, you don't see that often.
Yeah, you don't see that part in the news.
Yeah.
Nope.
Yeah, I'd also want to welcome the people you know, who came and, you know, we're happy that you participated in this and, you know, we'll see some actions that we can do and we hope you join us. So thank you for coming.
Absolutely. Yeah, if you haven't been here before, thank you, join us. We always like to have more members to help us do the work that we are committed to doing. No doubt about that, but you know, come out and cheer us on Thursday if you have
Yeah.
it free. Kat looked at the weather and it's supposed to be 74 degrees, which was really nice. We're walking and running or just cheering us on. So please join us. Anything else? But Mary, you muted yourself.
Are we supposed to get t-shirts? Is Deb on? I mean, no, Carol's not on.
Yeah, Carol's not here. Yeah, I think JCOA stole a lot of our audience tonight.
Yeah, I was sad to see that there
Yeah.
weren't as many people as, you know, we would have liked to see, especially for a talk like Fred's.
Yeah, I found out about the JCOA dinner too late to do any adjusting, but yeah, I mean, Jane's not here, and you know, JCOA is her baby, right?
Her baby, right?
Yeah, and so a lot of other JCOA is on here tonight, but as
Right.
Fred says, we do have the recording, so we'll have to
Right.
give them another chance.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay. I think it was great though. I think it was great.
It was
Yeah.
great. All right.
Okay, all
Good
right,
night.
everybody, thank you,
Bye,
have a good
everybody.
evening.
Thank you
All right,
Good
enjoy the warm weather.
night.
All right,
Okay,
bye-bye.
see you Thursday.
You got it.